What happens when Mary Jane meets Venom? Find out in today's episode of the Classic Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the Classic Comics Podcast, where we search for the best comics in the universe. From Boise, Idaho, here is your host, Adam Graham.
Welcome back. Well, we covered so much backstory in our previous episode, we only got to the first two issues in the Venom experiment trade. So we're going to cover the next 5 in this review. The middle story, the Venom experiment, sees Jerry Conway transitioning off the book, with Ryan Stegman becoming the main writer for the series from issue 9 on. It focuses on Mary Jane and the pressure she's dealing with, not only as a superheroine, but also as a mother, wife, and business owner. And the feeling that she's endangering her husband through the use of the Regent tech, which essentially has her draining from Spider-Man's powers during battle for her to get her own. When Liz Allen, Harry Osborn's ex-wife, gives Mary Jane the Venom symbiote, it's an offer she can't refuse. Now, positives, I do like the focus on Mary Jane and her conflict. It's interesting, and it's something a lot of female readers in particular can relate to. I also thought it was good to point out the obvious shortcomings of the Regent tech, and to take that head on. What doesn't work about the story? I think the way that the effects of the Venom symbiote on Mary Jane are shown can be a bit silly. In some ways, and at some moments, it seemed like she was incredibly hyperactive. It was like a 1980s or 1990s sitcom about the dangers of using diet pills. I also felt the arc here was too short. We get 2 issues dedicated to Mary Jane and the symbiote. And so we cycle really quickly through all the stages of that. Of her getting the symbiote, of her finding out the benefits of the symbiote, and then discovering its dark side. And I think with something like the symbiote, it would make sense to play this out over more issues. And you could get into more exploring the differences in how the symbiote works with her as opposed to how it worked with Peter and Eddie Brock, as well as lengthening the stages where she has some time where she's really enjoying it and seeming to thrive, and then the hints of the dark sides come in. That works better. It's more effective. I think the most effective version of the symbiote story I've ever seen was on the show Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, where they took 4 episodes to really draw that out, and I think that could have helped here. It also has a bit of a silly ending, and I try to avoid spoilers as much as possible. Though for issues in the middle of the book, it almost can't be helped. But she does overcome the symbiote through the power of her will, because girl power. I guess that's as good an explanation as I can come up with for it. Positive female role models, women achieving things, are great things to portray in comics. But if you don't want it to be a joke, you don't do things like that, where she's able to just magically do something that no one else is able to do in the way she defeats the symbiote and manages to master it. Now, I mentioned in the last episode that I thought that there was a problem with Spidey being too weak. Some, I think, have taken that criticism a bit further. For example, in one issue, he compliments her when she takes all of his power and uses it to throw a subway car at Mysterio to defeat him. And he compliments her on that and says maybe he should be the one to quit because, quote unquote, I've never taken anyone out by throwing a freaking subway car. I think that actually does show growth in his character and not weakness. He's, I think, wiser and humbler after years of marriage, having a 10-year-old. And he's also trying to be supportive of his wife as she tries to do this, particularly when she's in a moment where she feels like quitting. I also think, as much as, and I pointed to the problem with the Regency tech, there is a way in which it actually does make sense. Because for most battles, if you're dealing with, say, a gang, would you rather have one person with the strength of 50 people or two people who each have the strength of 25? The problem is, in the early going of her superhero career, Mary Jane doesn't quite have the discipline and mastery of her emotions and the tech, so she doesn't totally drain Peter when she gets excited. And that's understandable. I should also say I do like the look of the Venom costume on her. It's got a feeling kind of like the Julia Carpenter Spider-Woman costume from the 1990s. Very classic, very classy. Still, this arc had some problems. But the next one was actually really good. It was a one-shot that sets the stage for the final two issues, and it's a day in the life of an Osborn. And it focuses on Normie Osborn, grandson of Norman Osborn and son of Harry Osborn, who has gotten emancipated at a young age of 10 and is running the family business. Which is implausible, but this is a comic book. Earlier issues back in the first volume kind of focused on him as this sort of creepy, scheming villain. Kind of like the baby from Family Guy, I guess. Here you get a more sympathetic look at him. He still has some evil schemes he's trying to hatch, but there's a lot of hurt behind that as he goes to a birthday party and is missing out on the real love of family and given a lot of insincerity by the people who work at Oscorp. There's some funny parts in it too, and it features a visit from the Lizard and, of course, Spider-Man and Annie, aka Spiderling, show up at the end of the book. It's got some great emotional moments, and it sets the momentum for the final story arc. The Curse of the Green Goblin is the concluding story, and it finds Normie's evil plan comes to fruition as he kidnaps Annie and sicks a giant Green Goblin superpower-stealing robot on the city. And it's up to Spider-Man and Mary Jane to save their child. And all of New York while they're at it. This is a really fun 2 issues. It's got great action. We get to see Spider-Man get in some great licks, and the robot is fun, and also the X-Men come by to try and help. Action doesn't end up saving the day, however. It's ultimately Annie's nature and her willingness to reach out. And she proves that even though she's 9, she's already got the heart of a hero. It's a beautiful story with a nice ending. And it does end with a flash forward, actually, and sets the stage for a new creative team that will take the Spider family 8 years later, with Annie now aged to age 17. I think that is a move that makes sense, because as long as you're dealing with a 9-year-old, there are limits to what you can do in a story. Someone who is nearly an adult offers more storytelling opportunities and can be a more equal part of the team. I will say this this story actually contains the one element that I think would make this not necessarily a family-friendly book. or I should say kid-friendly perhaps, with a scene of a corporate board having just all been killed. It's not the bloodiest scene you'll see in comics, but it is probably the one part in this book that parents do want to be advised of. Overall, I still really enjoyed this book. Probably the biggest problem with it is that this particular run ended way too soon. And I think there was an editorial mandate for Marvel, and there was a deadline for when they had to get this resolved so the new creative team could take over with their new direction. And I think that hurt the book. It's unusual because I think comic books probably have a tendency more towards dragging stories out longer than they need to be, but this is one of those books that goes the opposite direction. Ideally, the Mary Jane and Venom story should have been at least 4 issues, and we should have had 3 issues of something else in between the final 3 issues that were included in this book. It would have allowed more room for pacing and character development. That said, I still think this is a classy comic. Despite its flaws, it's about characters that are truly likable, heroic, and noble, trying to do the right thing. It's Spider-Man, never being afraid of growing up or moving forward, but embracing his responsibilities. And it's a rising superhero and finding her first steps. So overall, I really enjoyed it. I hope if you read it, you enjoy it as well. We'll be back next time with another episode of the Classy Comics podcast. If you do have a comment, email it to me at classycomicsguy@gmail.com. But from Boise, Idaho, this is your host, Adam Graham, signing off.